Well, good day to everyone. I am Michael Weinberg. I'm a policy officer with the Thornburg Foundation. And the session that you have just tuned into, hopefully intentionally, is Advocacy Grant Making to Influence State Policy. I'd like to start by allowing each of the panelists to introduce themselves, and then I'll give a high-level overview of the objectives and the format for today, and then we'll jump right in. So Alan, can you introduce yourself first?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. My name is Alan Oliver. I'm the Executive Director of the Thornburg Foundation.
Great. Catherine?
Good morning, everybody. I'm Catherine Freeman, CEO of Growing Up New Mexico, formerly United Way of Santa Fe County.
Excellent. Terry?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Terry Cole, President and CEO for the Greater Albuquerque Chamber of Commerce.
And Senator Padilla.
Thank you, Michael. I'm Senator Michael Padilla. I represent the southwest quadrant of Bernalillo County, the most populous county in New Mexico, and I am very happy to be joined by this distinguished panel of hard-working New Mexicans.
Well, I am too. I'm honored to be on this with all of you. So thank you so much for your time. And what we hope today is that as funders, you'll get a sense of what's possible. Really, we're sharing a story about one particular policy win in New Mexico. We hope there are some universal lessons here, that it's not specific to early childhood, although that's clearly what we will be talking about. But whatever area you fund in, the big idea is that is around the power of systems change and how philanthropy and advocates and policymakers can work together to advance that type of change that we think makes a lasting difference in how you do your grant making. There are a couple of specific objectives. We'll provide some tools that we think could be useful to you, and as well as some specific actions that our foundation undertook, as well as some other foundations, and the way that we partnered with some of these advocacy groups. And really what we want you to see is that it's safe to dip your toe in the water, that there's a way to enter this gently and within a relatively short amount of time to be able to accomplish big things. So with that, what I'd like to do is start with you, Alan. And if you could just set the table, provide a brief overview of the Thornburg Foundation, and talk a little bit about how our foundation moved into this space of valuing advocacy.
All right, can do. Thank you, Michael. Thank you for that nice intro and overview for us. And my kind of thing I would also just say is the water is safe, come on in. So for the Thornburg Foundation, we're a family foundation. We're based here in Santa Fe, but we have a focus to solely working in the New Mexico area. Our founder is Garrett Thornburg, who helped create Thornburg Investment Management. And we are leanly staffed. We have a staff of 6. So for those smaller funders, this is possible with a small staff, trust us. We have an asset base of about $157 million. And so that means that we give about $6 million of grants out each year. And our areas of focus are good government reform, food and ag policy, water, and what we're going to talk a lot about is education, early childhood education, K-12 education. So how did we get here? As a relatively small funder in the state of New Mexico, we've actually been around for 20 years. And during that 20 years, our board has made really significant investments over time into homeless shelters, food banks, youth engagement, but didn't see changes in the landscape. Felt like it was an ongoing, just continuously putting money into very good nonprofits, doing good work, but not seeing systemic change. And one of the things, a quote from our board chair is that he does not like scattering money on the ground. He is a businessman. He likes to go and implement things and do it well. And so he challenged us to look at root problems and try and go after systemic change that's going to address and hopefully solve some of those systemic problems. And as you can tell, he put us out with challenges around education and agriculture, water, and good government. So that gives you, so with that naturally turned us to, well, with our modest grant dollars that are going out, how can we have a much more systemic change or a systemic approach? And that led us to advocacy, and looking at advocacy in a place where how do we do the fundamental research to understand what are the problems, what are the evidence-based solutions that exist out there. No reason to recreate the wheel. There's a lot of good solutions that are out there. What do the stakeholders and communities think? And then how do we find good partners? One thing you'll hear me emphasize in my presentation, I'm so delighted to have you joined by my colleagues here, is that we believe very firmly that things need to be very centrist, bipartisan, because in order for it to last, in order for it to be sustainable over time. And so, which also, again, leads us also back to evidence. So that's a kind of a quick sum up of both the foundation and a little bit of how we got into advocacy.
That's fantastic. Thank you for that overview. You named those issue areas. Maybe rewind the clock for us and take us through the thinking of our board in how did we come to pick those? Because there are lots of challenges out there. Why those? How did we do that?
I would say it's because there was we've now done 2 rounds of this, where we did a very initial round and now we've done a second round. And what I would suggest is, for us, it was a marrying of what are the board's interests? What do they care about? Where's their passion? Because if that passion needs to be there in order for this investment to be sustained over time. And so that was really critical information. But then the second thing we did is we hired outside experts, people where they're independent minded. They are going to give us, what's the landscape for an issue area and give it to us in very unvarnished, clear terms. So, and then within that landscape, let me just give you a couple of example questions. There's actually 16 questions. It's rather intensive. But some of the questions I would just throw out is there an exact definition of the problem? Is there clear policy solutions for this problem? And then an evidence base supporting it? Are there opportunities for bipartisanship, a centrist approach? Are there well-respected nonprofits to advocate on behalf of these solutions? We very much like, whenever possible, to be partnering with other foundations and other funders. So we look, are there national funders, are there other state funders, are there sometimes even local funders, or even individual donors who will line up and also support the effort. And then, it comes down sometimes to real brass tacks of is this feasible? Looking at it as can this actually be done? Can it be done in we have tight timeframes. We say 5 to 7 years for this meaningful systemic investment. And that also looks at, there's just no way around it. If you're engaged in policy, it's understanding the political landscape, and thinking about where is there already momentum. This is something our board chair talks a lot about, is where's there already kind of momentum in the field. And the great thing is that there's, and in the field that we're going to talk about today, fantastic momentum, great champions like the ones that are in front of you on the screen, who have been creating that momentum for years before we even engaged. So I want to make sure to highlight that. That's how we would do kind of our landscape analysis.
Great. I will note for participants that the document that we created that we use as our scoring guide will be available as a handout. So some of those questions that you articulated, participants can see those. And could easily modify them, but sometimes it's nice just to have that as a starting point and to see how we approached it. The last thing, Alan, and by the way, we're doing great on time, is we've picked an issue area. In this case, you named the 3 that we started with. Can you talk a bit about our strategic planning once we'd identified that issue area, how we developed those plans and what they look like?
Absolutely. Delighted to. So kind of the very first and most, and I would suggest most critical element was, who did we hire to develop that strategic plan? And we, for us, it was really critical not just to have the expertise on the issue, but also somebody who had a deep understanding of the policy process, which is challenging, to put it politely. And so, for example, in early childhood, we hired Michael Weinberg, who has a PhD in education leadership and had been working at the Legislative Finance Committee for several years. So he had a deep both understanding of the policy questions and then a deep understanding of what are evidence-based practices in education. So the who you hire to lead it really does matter quite a bit. The second thing is, so within the strategy, there is, for us, there's a lot of discussions with stakeholders and taking, we put together our framework, but then we bring it out to the different constituencies that really deeply care. Education, early childhood education in particular, has a whole lot of people that care, as they should, and then they provide a lot of input into that strategy. One of the key things that I would lift out of our strategic approach is that we have within our theory of change is something called tipping points, and it's a belief that if we're able to achieve certain kind of mid-level campaign type objectives, then the momentum is shifting on whatever is the issue area. That often links very much into policy, and then from those we work backwards. So we're very good, I would suggest, to be very good, Michael better said is very good, at identifying what's the research gaps that we need. How do we bring people together to try and build out consensus on different questions? What are the different kind of other real pre-policy work that needs to happen to build out trust in the community about here's solutions that will work for everyone and achieve the objectives that we're hoping for. I think the other thing my 2 other things I might just add in, we have a real strong belief in being very adaptive. One of the things that's really critical, and everybody on this call knows this way better than me, but is that situations change, things will be changing, before a legislative session, sometimes during a legislative session, after a legislative session, where it's really important for funders to be flexible to the needs of the grantees, because they're changing a lot. And so I want to just say programming in flexibility from the beginning and having a lot of trust with trusted partners, I think, is really critical. I think the last thing I would just note, because a lot of family foundations or other foundations may be concerned around different legal restrictions. We are too. We care very deeply about those. We know we don't lobby. We put hard boundaries in terms of what we will engage in, and we follow those rules ourselves quite religiously, but that also means that we put a lot of trust into our partners, and we choose great partners.
Yeah, that's fantastic, Alan. Thank you so much for that. And you were talking about that need for flexibility and nimbleness, and I'm sure Catherine will talk about this, but it seems like one of her favorite expressions is knees bent. Let me take a few minutes and provide some context for this specific topic that we're talking about. And just to name it, the big win here was the creation of a new early childhood department in New Mexico as a standalone agency. that was not the goal from the outset. I should just to clarify and to touch back to this idea of a strategic plan. We didn't say we want a standalone department. What we said is we know that early childhood is increasing in importance. The state is recognizing how significant it is, and it's spread out between these various agencies. And there's this opportunity to make it work better. And it was a pretty vague starting point. So it's a great story, which we'll hear more about how we actually got to this conclusion of the need for a new department. But even before that, as Alan described, we entered into this around 2014. And one of the things we recognized as a foundation is that we have a role to play as well. And that we're more effective in doing that by working with other foundations. So one of the first things we did was pretty quickly convened others within New Mexico who have a common interest in early childhood. And at first there were two of us, and we said, well, who else can we invite? And we tried to make the table or the tent as big as possible. Eventually there were about 8 of us who are all, I shouldn't say all, 7 of us are small to medium-sized local family foundations or community foundations. One is a national funder, the Kellogg Foundation, for whom New Mexico is a place where they fund. But we basically said, we're smarter working together than we are alone. Let's learn about what each is working on. And in the best of worlds, we'll be more effective. And in even the better of worlds, we could make the lives of our grantees a little bit easier. So that brought us together. We were learning together. And one of the things we realized is that as a group of funders, we had this unique opportunity to reach out to policymakers and promote and educate around the importance of early childhood issues. In 2015, we started what we called building the bench of early childhood legislative champions, because we had our faithful, Senator Padilla was one from the get-go, who we could go to anytime we needed something around early childhood, but we thought, we need a choir. We want as many voices singing off of this same hymn book as we can. That eventually evolved into what we called the Early Childhood Legislative Caucus. And I suspect, Senator Padilla, you might be able to talk a little bit more about that here in a couple minutes. But the other thing that we decided as a group is that we could again, using this idea of dipping our toe into policy waters, we were approached by the Alliance for Early Success, which is a national policy funding network. They had made a grant to Frontera Strategy out of Texas, and the Texas Educational Grant Makers Advocacy Consortium. They have this lovely acronym, which is TGAC. Yeah, lovely. Jason Sabo, Jennifer Esterline came to us and said, hey, we've done this in Texas, tried to lift up different advocacy voices. Would you guys be willing to try it in New Mexico? And we said, what the heck? We'll pilot it. That was 2015. We agreed that our priority at that point was home visiting. All of us were interested. And for those of you who aren't that familiar, home visiting it's basically parent coaching for a family with a newborn. This idea that babies don't come with an instruction manual, and so it's helpful to have someone who guides you through some of those early years. And there's a strong evidence base to support it. The state seemed to like it, and our push those early years was, well, let's grow that. We released an RFP, which we'll make available as one of our handouts, a request for proposals. And really what we were trying to do was bring unexpected messengers to the table. Those early efforts were quite successful. And in some ways we had chosen low-hanging fruit because we wanted to experience success. And as a group, we said, this is exciting. You know, we put in $5,000 to $10,000 a piece, and here the legislature increased funding for home visiting by $1.8 million. That's a pretty good return on investment. Our boards, they like return on investments. They like being able to say our dollars were highly leveraged. And Ellen, that may be something you talk more about as well. But it was this whole idea of, well, now success begets success. So we stuck with that. We did that for a couple of years, and that brought us to this sticky problem about if we're going to grow early childhood funding in New Mexico, we really need to be able to answer these questions around what's the plan? How do we do that responsibly? So if it's okay, Catherine, I want to hand the ball off to you to sort of walk us through that. And maybe you can start just by giving us a sense of who Growing Up New Mexico is, and how you started with early childhood advocacy.
Thank you, Michael and Alan and everybody else who's here. You know, I do need to give a shout out at the beginning to the Thornburg Foundation, and I'm going to tell you why. At Growing Up New Mexico, then United Way of Santa Fe County, we decided that our entire mission would be early childhood, which was a real departure from the way most United Ways operated. And we made that decision, and we were working on great programs and working with funders on great programs, home visiting, childcare, yada, yada, yada. And it didn't take long for us at now Growing Up New Mexico and our board to realize that unless we were in the policy area, we weren't going to make much progress for all of the reasons that Alan has talked about in terms of building a functional early childhood system. So at that point, we made a decision to stick our toe into policy, and it wasn't long after that you know, we became a partner of the Thornburg Foundation. And that's really, really, really important because many of the things, you know, we don't just go after funding at Growing Up New Mexico. We really don't. There needs to be alignment of thinking, alignment of mission. And Alan at the time was the person that we were talking with, but the idea of building a system, a balanced system, a centrist system with a plan, a strategic plan, was very much within our desire for early childhood. And, you know, Alan and I did a lot of conversation, and then subsequently Michael, about kind of what the vision around that would be and would look like. So, you know, I almost identify our organization more as a broker than an advocacy organization, because it was important to us at the very beginning and to the Thornburg Foundation that we move forward with policy that made sense from a lot of perspectives, from the legislative perspective. The Legislative Finance Committee and David Abbey have been a really solid partner from day one and still are. The executive also, you know, with a lot of relationship with the new early childhood department and the business community, Terry and all of the folks that are involved in that conversation, which led us to, you know, again, wanting to operate as brokers, wanting to understand the positions and the experience and the field of all the people that we were partnering with, so that when we take policy forward, it's pretty well vetted, and we're pretty sure that the state of New Mexico and the legislators and all of that are kind of on board. So when I say we're not as much an advocate, we don't just pick an issue and say, I'm going to advocate this issue until I die, even if it doesn't make sense. We don't do that. We want fiscal responsibility. We want all the partnerships, that we have with Terry and other business organizations. And then, of course, last but not least, it was the partnership with Senator Padilla, who had worked on this and thought about this for a really long time. Lieutenant Governor Morales and Senator Padilla had been focused on a department actually before we came to the conclusion that that is a really good idea to do that. So did I answer your question?
You did. That was fantastic. And actually, that's a nice segue into this next question around coalition building, because I love that term broker.
Yeah.
And, we create, by the way, we contracted out for the creation of this business plan. And one of the aspects of the business plan touched on governance. Again, it did not say create a standalone department. It laid out there are 3 options for how you improve governance. And Catherine, I remember when we were presenting, and one of our favorite Republican legislators who's since passed away said, sounds like we need a new department. And of course, as you said, Senator Padilla had already been there for several years and was probably nodding vigorously saying, I've been telling you guys this for a while. But Catherine, you then took that out to a big group of stakeholders. Can you talk about that process a little bit, the coalition
Yes,
building?
certainly can talk about that process. It's an important, and again, back to the Thornburg Foundation and their approach, and consequently the approach of the Early Childhood Funders Group, thanks to Michael's leadership, funded us really well to be able to do this work. 2 things: funded us really well and trusted us to do it right. And we're in for the long haul, but not forever, 5 to 10 years. So we like that. 5 to 7 years. So we like that. As we moved into this huge project. So essentially we vetted the business plan that the Early Childhood Funders Group funded and put together, and it had levers within it, which I won't go into. One of the main levers was, it wasn't called governance, but how do we structure this thing? How do we do that moving forward? So we launched with generous funding from Thornburg and the Early Childhood Funders Group, a process to vet the business plan, and it was really great. It was largely built on many, many, many community conversations. So we went all around the state and did conversations specific to the levers. And those conversations were important because they included parents and providers. So it was really an opportunity. I can be up here, we can be up here, but we really need to know, can this work? Alan referred to that, for the providers and people in our state. So lots of community conversations. We also did key informant interviews. We did a lot of surveying. We did a voter poll. So all of those aspects of bringing together really what the state needs and wants were really, really, really important. And the end result of that vetting, and then we also led a needs assessment process for the state of New Mexico, all pointed to really, really clearly, was said by everybody, we need a department that will align and integrate and be accountable. I'm going to say all the things because these are important. Measure outcomes, have a clear strategic plan, and all of that stuff. So there were so many people across the state who were able to express their voice in this. Chamber, everybody. Chamber, yeah. Everybody. Yeah.
No, that's fantastic, Catherine. Thank you so much. And Terry, she named the chamber. How did the Albuquerque Chamber, the largest chamber in New Mexico, really our only major urban area, how did you decide to focus on early childhood education?
because this has been a long, long road. And as a part of our initial effort in education reform, we visited a place called Bright Beginnings. And it's in, I think I've talked to Catherine about it quite a bit. It's in North Carolina. And we learned about early childhood. We learned about the importance of it in this whole education reform framework. And so early in our work, it became an important element for us. No one had to convince us after doing the benchmarking that we did to understand the importance of it. So we came back to New Mexico and worked with Senator Padilla and with David Abbey, who runs LFC in New Mexico, and our friends in our money committees in the legislature, Senate Finance, House Appropriations, because just like everything else, early childhood needed money. And so we supported the efforts to incrementally increase early childhood funding in New Mexico year over year, over year, over year. Senator Padilla, I think he'll have to remind me, but it was maybe 3 years ago, maybe 4, when he introduced his bill to begin to create a early childhood department. And I remember sitting in Senate Education at the time when he first introduced it, and I thought, oh my goodness, the last thing we need to do is be growing government. So he was ahead of the game, and it took us a while to appreciate what he was trying to do. We spent the next couple of years trying to do it sort of our way, which is to work with CYFD, work with PED, work with all these education committees, try to get people to coordinate, cooperate, be accountable, and so on. And I only had to do that for about 16 months to realize that Senator Padilla was absolutely right, that there was no way we could bring together all the activities that are required for early childhood unless we formed a department. So we began our advocacy together with him and with Catherine. And in that role, you all served as the broker because you took us to breakfast. And I remember in 2019, in the fall of 2019, both of you took us to breakfast and you said, we want to throw our support in toward Senator Padilla's effort to start an early childhood department. And then I moved that forward quickly, efficiently through our board of directors and our system so that we could be an early supporter of the project. And then we just worked as hard as we could together with all of you to get it done.
That's fantastic. Terry, will you say a little bit about some of the things you were able to do, that hard work to get it done? Because I think as a business organization, you're uniquely positioned to do some things that others might not have been able to do. And will you say a little bit about that?
Sure, you bet. So I do think something that you talk about so often, I think it's Alan and Michael, maybe you too, but you talk about the importance of unexpected messengers, and that resonated with me as we were trying to move this idea forward of creating a department, of getting long-term sustainable funding forward, and so on. Because chambers of commerce, and it's true with ours as well, we don't stand up every day and, you know, celebrate the idea of growing government. And so because we supported it so strongly, we were an unexpected messenger, and I think that was helpful in the lobbying effort. I think Senator Padilla, I see that he agrees. I'm glad. I do think that unexpected messenger role that we played helped move it forward very, very well. The other thing I will say is this. We needed good, strong information and good factual data, and we needed to be able to communicate that in ways that our legislature and the governor and her staff understood and appreciated. And that kind of information came from Thornburg, from you, and from Catherine. So without that, we would have had to do a lot of research on our own. and we might not have been able to move quite as fast, but that was a real important point.
Senator Padilla, you're clearly the batting cleanup here, and you get to bring the whole thing home. We didn't mean to imply that by any means you're old, but you were working on this for a while. You're a champion for these issues. What changed? What was different in 2019 that made this finally an idea whose time had come?
Well, thank you, Michael, and thank you, Alan and Terry and Catherine. And gosh, you know what, really what I want to say is just thank you and good night. I mean, everything that you just heard was actually perfect, right to the point. There were a couple of things I was going to mention that I thought, well, and Terry picked up on a few of those, which I thought was fantastic. You know, I often run around saying things like it takes an awful lot of ingredients to help a cake stand up. And sometimes, you know, your cake will stand up and then all of a sudden it falls over on the side of itself. And so without, you know, and I'm doing my level best not to sound like a politician, but without literally everybody you just heard of, and probably another chorus of 900 people out there that they represent, this thing really never would have happened. I mean, when I introduce a bill in Santa Fe, or I'm going after something and getting it done, and I feel like I've gotten some pretty big things done in our legislature, my colleagues all know how I feel about it. They know I'm not going to introduce a bill to waste their time, and I'm not a legislator that introduces a bill as a message bill, if you will, or a message this or that. So they know that I'll talk till I'm blue in the face because I really want it done. But when they start hearing from a Terry Cole and a Catherine Freeman and an Alan Oliver and a Michael Weinberg, things really changed that year. I have to tell you that everything you just heard was spot on, 100% correct. You know, when I opened my business, you know, many years ago, I did that because I grew up out of extreme poverty, me and my sisters, and we always wanted to give something back to our community. And so we all volunteer and we all do different things. This is what I do in my community to help in any way I can. When I opened my business, I went to the bank without a business plan or a financial plan. Don't anybody laugh, but I did. And so I walk in there and I'm, you know, about 19 years old, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to get this thing done and they're going to lend me all this money and I have a great idea. Oh my gosh, I'm so wonderful. And they laughed me right out of that bank. Let me tell you what. And then the next time they did again. But once I, you know, met with some real experts and some real folk that could really help me to get this thing together, this business has turned out to create over 3,000 jobs here in New Mexico. It's a beautiful thing. But I went into that bank with a business plan, with a financial plan, and that's when things really changed for me. So when I started coming at early education, you thought I would have learned my lesson, right? So I was working on it 2-3 years before I even came to the Senate, because what I really want is a high quality workforce here in New Mexico, a workforce that gives us higher quality for my goods and services and lower liability for my goods and services. If I can do that, I can run a very successful business. At the end of the day, that's what we really need to build here in New Mexico. And I saw early education as one of those key ingredients of our ship of state here that we were truly missing, and we had to turn that ship around. And so I started going, you know, working on this before I came to the legislature. Then I ran and I got into the legislature, into the Senate. And well, we need more money. That's what I kept hearing from this throng of people out there. And then I thought to myself, wait a minute, when I was opening my business, what I really needed was governance. I needed a solid plan, a business plan, a financial, a technical, a process developed plan. I needed good people. And so I thought, let's focus on governance before we actually go out and get these really big dollars for this particular process here. And that's exactly what wound up happening. We put our heads together, and I have to tell you, I can remember exactly where I was, Terry, when I heard that you were going to support this thing and bring all of your support and your folks behind it. I can remember exactly where I was when I first spoke to Catherine about this. And I have to tell you, when you're a politician, a legislator, and a senator, or whatever, and you're trying to get things done in your legislature, you don't immediately think about a foundation. I'm sorry, but you just don't. And I didn't realize the real value of it until we actually started, you know, kind of putting coal in the not Terry Cole, but coal into the firing, you know, deal and getting going with this thing. And I have to tell you that, like I said, I never would have thought about how incredibly valuable a Thornburg Foundation was to getting this thing done until we actually got going. Data and information, research, funding to get meetings together, and not just the act of getting the department created, But before, all of that heavy lifting before to fund things like what Catherine was working on, I think you visited every single nook and cranny of the state to get as much data as humanly possible to put this plan together, which was beautiful. And then in the process of helping us to coordinate things, and then even after we created the department, to bring this caucus together, which brings a bipartisan group of legislators together on a very regular basis to continue to improve our early education and early learning services here in New Mexico. But again, I have to say that nothing like this really big lift for our state, which I truly believe is going to turn our state around. You know, we do rank in the 49th and 50th, you know, ranking with child well-being, and we've done that for years now. And nobody that's talking today and spoke today would ever have that on an ongoing basis. And that's why I think why we've all rolled up our sleeves to get that done. You know, you talked about lobbying and things of that nature. Gosh, I really wouldn't call it lobbying. I would just call it, you know, a passionate care and love and for our state, and rolling up our sleeves and getting people who really care about the future of this state and the children in this state. And so, you know, again, I could talk for many hours if you let me. And I don't think we have that much time today, but I just want to say thank you to everybody that we heard from today, and all the people really we didn't hear from, because there are a lot of other folks out there too. But I just have to say, none of this would have happened had we not put this coalition of people together to get this done.
Thank you so much, Senator Padilla. And thank you for all the passion that you brought to this. I think if anyone ever has a chance, they should invite you out for a drink and get you to tell them the story of how do you get this thing through Senate rules. That in itself is a great story. What happened in Senate Ed? I mean, that's the sausage making. Yeah, exactly. But those are wonderful stories, and we're just so grateful for all your hard work and sticking with this. Alan, can you wrap us up here? And you know, Senator Padilla, you talked about the role that a foundation can play. Why do you think our board is so enthusiastic about this approach? And are there some lessons here that you can kind of tease out that you think other foundations might benefit from?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just also want to say thank you to all my colleagues here for just wonderful remarks. It's so great to hear all the different stories being lifted. Our board is like really enthusiastic about this work. And I want to just kind of bucket it in two different ways. First off, the issue itself brings a lot of passion. It just does. And so like by our board and the research that kind of lent itself very much to this area, it was, there's a ton of passion in the board, and you can see it from our team as well into the issue, which makes the work it's not work, it's passion work, if you will. The second thing is, you know, so like I imagine a lot of foundation boards are made up of a lot of business leaders. Ours is no different, and they want to see results. It's a whole group of get it done people, and so this example I think really shows just how deeply impactful this work can be. I'll talk about it in a really broad way, but like, you know, for obviously setting up this whole cabinet agency is a huge move. That governance and being able to suddenly, rather than have a fragmented system, have an alliance system with all the funding being used in a really thoughtful economic way, which just, by the way, for our business leaders, our board, we're really excited about, far more efficient use of state dollars sounds terrific to us. So definitely lots of alignment around leverage. I would say, like, for example, like when we started this work, our asset base was 105 million. But because of the impacts that we were having, the board decided to expand the investment. And so we're now a significantly bigger foundation just simply because of the impacts and the outcomes that we were already seeing.
Thank you for those thoughts, Alan. And thanks to all the panelists.